So let's move over to the filters screen. And there right now I just have my dummy content, the filter screen. And that's of course not what I want there. Instead there, I want to have some text at the top actually where I say available filters / restrictions or something like this, where I want to point at a certain style object with styles. Let's name it title maybe, because it will be our main title here. And below that, I want to have my different filters. Now, how does a filter look like? We need some switch, some checkbox, something like this that allows us to turn a filter on and off, and a label for that. Now that means that probably a view makes sense to group label and that switch together and position them side by side probably. And I'll give that view a style of filter container, something like that. And in there, as I said, I want to have a text with a label. For example, say gluten-free there. And next to that, a switch. And thankfully, React Native has a built-in switch. It's named switch. The switch component renders a nice switch which we can use. So here we can just use switch like this and render this onto the screen. We'll need to configure this, but to get started, we can use it like this. Now for some basic styling for the title and the filter container here. Let's go down here. Let's add filter container and title here. And the title is pretty straightforward. There I want to use font family Open Sans bold and a font size of 22, a margin in all directions of 20, and also set text align to center this. The overall screen, by the way, should not center items on the main axis anymore. So vertical centering should no longer happen. And for that, we can simply get rid of justify content center. And filter container, on the other hand, should position the switch and the text next to each other in a row. So here we can set flex direction to row. Justify the content maybe by adding space around. And align items on the cross axis in the center so that it's centered vertically. Now let's have a look at that. If we save this and we go to the filters screen, this is what we got. Here we got our switch, and as you see right now, it's always jumping back. That's something we'll take care about in a second, but generally we see it. And here on filters for Android, we got an Android switch, which also jumps back, but which conveniently is already pre-styled for Android. So that's actually another component built into React Native, which has a default look for Android. So that's not too bad. One thing I want to change is for the filter container, I want to assign a fixed width of, let's say, 80%, and actually change this here to space between, not space around, because I think that looks a bit nicer now. Yeah, definitely. Also on Android. And now we can make sure that this switch actually works and that it doesn't jump back when we trigger it. For that, you need to know that for switches, you manually need to manage their state. And that's actually not new. In React, it's often the case that for these input components, you need to store what the user enters and feed that back into the component to reflect that in the updated UI. And we do this with state management. So we import the use state hook from React so that we can manage state here in this functional component. And then here I'll have my gluten state, and I'll name this is gluten free and set is gluten free. Use state, initially that's false. And now on that switch here, you have a value property. That's a property built into the built-in switch, where I feed in is gluten free. So this takes a boolean, which indicates whether that switch is rendered as active or not active. So if it's marked as checked or not checked, I should say. And you have an onValue change property, which takes a function that fires whenever the user clicks that switch. This function here gets the new value. So if the switch was in the false mode, in the unchecked mode, the new value will be true. And the other way around, of course. And we can use that to update our state and set is gluten-free to the new value. And since we also feed this state back in, now our switch should be changeable and should stay in that updated mode. So now if we have a look at this, now we can really toggle that switch, and that's an improvement. The styling of the switch is not what I want, however. It uses some default color. Of course, I would want to use my colors that I use in the app all the time. And for that, we can import our colors constant, of course. So import colors from constants colors. And the switch has another property that helps us with styling here. We can add track color, which allows us to customize the colors for that switch, so the background color and so on. And track color takes an object as a value, hence we have an object which we pass here to this dynamic binding, where you can set a background color for the false state, so if it's inactive, if it's unchecked, and there I'm fine with the default actually, this looks good to me. But you can also set one for the true case, which is the case that it is checked, and there I want to use colors primary color. And of course, you can take any color you wish. If we do that, and I go back to filters, now we use our own color here, which of course is more in line with the rest of this application. And obviously, this will also work here on Android. We can also set the thumb color, which is, well, the color of this thumb here, which is green here on Android. And this just takes a string, a color string, so a hex code, for example, and there we can also point at colors, primary color. And if we do that, on iOS now it has this color, and the same on Android. Now, of course, on iOS that doesn't really look that good. There I would like to keep the default, and the solution is pretty simple. We can again use the good old platform API, import this, and then here when assigning a thumb color, I check for platform OS equal to Android, in which case I want to use the primary color for my thumb. Otherwise, I'll set this to an empty string, which means it will use the default, which is white on iOS. And with that, here we have the same look as before, which I like on iOS, but of course you can also fine-tune this to your requirements. And on Android, we will still have the look we saw before. If I go to the filter screen here, which looks good there as well. So that's this switch and how we can add it. Now we just need to repeat this for all our other switches as well. So all the other filters, I mean. So I can copy that view and add it again for lactose-free or for vegan. But if you find yourself copy and pasting over and over again, as we're trying to do it here, that's always a good case for creating a separate component or a function that renders this reusable code. And here, again, I will create a separate component in that same file because I really only use it in there. Again, you could also go for a separate file if you wanted to. I'll name it filter switch, and this gets some props. And in this component, in the end, I return this code we set up before with the view and the text and so on. And of course, now the text needs to be dynamic. There we could set this to props label, and it's totally up to you what you choose here because you'll be the one passing in the props values later anyways. And of course here, what happens on value change and what we pass to value also differs. So here, this should be props state, for example, or props value or whatever you want to use. And here for on value change, I'll simply point at props on change, for example. But again, all these props names, of course, are totally up to you because you'll be the one using that component. And we will actually use it now here, like this, a self-closing component, where we now can set a label because I'm expecting a label prop here. If you named it differently, you need to name it differently here, of course. And the label, of course, is gluten-free because I'm about to replace this switch here. Then we need to pass in a state because I added a state prop here to manage my value. If you named it differently, you need to name it differently down there as well. And here I'll point at is gluten-free at my state. And on change needs to be provided because here I'm using the on change prop to bind it to on value change. So this should point at a function, and of course here I will simply keep this function here. And since I just use onChange here to forward it to onValueChange, we get the new value argument here as well. Now we can get rid of this view down there and just use our filter switch component, and now simply repeat that, which is of course way easier. So now here we can also have lactose-free, vegan, and vegetarian, and we need to add 3 new states now. So here, let me replicate this. We have is lactose free and set is lactose free. Here we have is vegan and set is vegan. And here we have is vegetarian and set is vegetarian. Now we just need to make sure we use the states in the right places. So for the second filter switch, where we have the lactose-free filter, I forward the is lactose-free state and I update set is lactose-free, of course. For the vegan switch, I forward is vegan and we update it with set is vegan. And for vegetarian, we forward is vegetarian and we update set is vegetarian. Like this. Okay, that should be it. If we now save this, we should have a filter screen with our different filters, which we can set independently because we're having independent states. I think it would be nice to have some spacing between these rows. So let's implement this on our filter container here. We can simply add a margin vertical of, let's say, 10, and this should, or 50 maybe, a bit more. And this should make sure that we have some spacing there. Yeah, and this looks quite nice.